Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us, and welcome to our ongoing series of science teaching and learning book chats. My name is Doug Larkin from Montclair State University in New Jersey, and I'm the chair of the AERA Science Teaching and Learning SIG, at least for one more month. And we're glad you're all with us here today. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Lauren Madden, a professor of elementary science education in the Department of Elementary and Early Childhood Education at the College of New Jersey. She coordinates the undergraduate minor and graduate certificate in environmental sustainability education, and she has published more than 40 peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters, authored a wonderful elementary science methods textbook, and written recommendations for New Jersey's implementation of statewide climate change education standards. She's been recognized as the Association for Science Teacher Education as the 2021 Outstanding Science Teacher Educator of the Year. And Dr. Madden seeks to advocate for scientific literacy and the health of our planet through teaching and learning. The current book, which we'll be talking about tonight, which she edited, is called Climate Change Education Across Disciplines, K-12, New Jersey and Beyond. So please help me welcome my friend and fellow New Jerseyan, Dr. Lauren Madden. Welcome and thank you for joining us to talk about your book.
Thank you so much for having me, Doug, and thank you for being flexible and allowing me to invite some co-authors to join our talk tonight too. Um, Given that it's the AERA Science Teaching and Learning SIG, I wanted to make sure other folks who are actively involved in science teaching and learning are here. So I will just briefly let everybody who will share a few moments about their chapters as well. Dr. Sammy Khan,
I'm going to pin people to the screen as you introduce them. So let's
Dr. Karen Woodruff, and Dr. Melissa Zarata. I also want to give a strange caveat because in this world, there's always strange things going on. I'm going to be muting myself whenever I'm not talking because there is a goose and coyote situation happening behind my house in the land behind our house, and it's really very strange. So it's really crazy loud noises that keep coming back and forth. So apologies if I am not, just go crazy with your hands so I know that I'm on mute if I am.
And I'm sure we'll talk about ecosystem shift and as things move in and out. Okay, so thanks. I realize I did not share my screen before, so let me do that now so we can see. There we go. Everybody can see that. And then we'll go to your slides. I think actually we're over here. Let's try that. Are these visible, Lauren? Can you see your slides? Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to hand it off to you just to introduce the book and tell us a little bit about it.
All right, excellent. Well, thanks again. This is the flyer that Doug so kindly made for us. And I'm really excited to talk to you about our book, which is about teaching climate change in New Jersey. So the agenda for how this is going to go, I'm going to give you some very brief overview about the book itself, how it came to be, why we decided to write this book. And then you'll get some highlights from authors of several of the key chapters in this book, the ones that are mostly aligned to science teaching and learning. As you'll see, the book is quite interdisciplinary. So this one, we wanted to focus on the science lens here. All right, so why? This is the big why. In 2020, when we were all at home on lockdown, New Jersey's First Lady, Tammy Murphy, announced that our state would be the first in the nation to implement climate change guidelines in our K-12 education standards. This is unusual for a lot of reasons, and I often find when I talk about climate change education in international audiences, it's really important to give the caveat that it's not typical that a first lady of a state has so much input in policy, in education policy in particular. But Mrs. Murphy is committed to climate change education. She worked closely with Al Gore's Climate Reality Project, and this was one of her goals coming in. So it was really interesting the way this came forward was through an executive process, not a legislative process. So as we're following some other states who are beginning to more explicitly address climate change in their learning standards or guidelines, most are going through a very different pathway than where we're going through here in New Jersey. So I think that's important to recognize because having a champion in the governor's mansion is definitely a positive that we had that maybe doesn't exist in all places. Um, so right as this announcement was made, I was contracted by the New Jersey School Boards Association and Sustainable Jersey for Schools, to write a report on recommendations on how we could effectively roll out these new standards that address climate change. So we brought in a lot of different stakeholders, school district, STEM supervisors, practicing teachers, school boards folks, a lot of different stakeholders from across the state, and also teachers, practicing teachers who we knew were teaching about climate change and doing so effectively, just from within our networks. And we asked a lot of questions to try and gather as much information as we could, and really came across four big uh, areas of recommendation. So one was that teachers needed professional learning related to climate change, both the content and the pedagogical strategies that we need. Also, to be clear, the next gen science standards absolutely include climate change, starting in middle school, but starting in kindergarten is a little bit different, and it's actually a lot different. And we want to make sure that when we're making these recommendations, that teachers feel supported in using developmentally appropriate strategies for integrating climate change. The second is, of course, curricular resources. We want to make sure that if we're asking teachers to do something, that they have the tools to do it. And those could be new curriculum. They could also be looking at your existing curricular material and having the time and space to be able to make explicit connections and shifts to seamlessly integrate climate change into those topics. The next one is community connections, really making sure that what's happening inside our classrooms is not happening in a vacuum, that it's happening in a way that teachers can connect with their communities and make sure that they're engaging their students as people and not just learners in their classrooms. And then finally, support structures from boards of education and school administrators. And I will say research I've done since this book has come out sheds a lot different light on this last bullet, which I'd be happy to talk about another time. But that's beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. Um, we also have some great resources in our state. In 2020, our state DEP put out a scientific report on climate change and showed that the changes we're seeing in New Jersey are magnified relative to other places in the US in terms of drought, in terms of flood, in terms of pollen in our air, and a multitude of other reactions. We know in December 2023, Patterson Public Schools were closed for 2 weeks for rain. Who ever heard of a rain day before, right? Like we're seeing really unique things happening here. So we're grateful that education about climate change as a mitigation strategy and as an educational strategy is sort of part of what we're doing here. We knew that there were educators in our state across disciplines already engaged in climate change work. Um, we also know that those aren't necessarily classroom teachers. Sometimes we turn to informal educators, some school administrators, and other folks who are enacting climate change education at big and small scales. One of the other pieces I think that's important is that other states did follow suit. So soon after New Jersey passed our law or adopted the standards in all subject areas except ELA and math, Connecticut followed suit with social studies and science standards starting at fifth grade. Maine used youth climate action to make some gigantic changes in what's available to teachers in terms of professional learning. California, Oregon, Washington. So we're seeing other things happening in terms of legislation related to climate change education. But like I said at the beginning, given that our path was an executive route, it is quite different from where other states went. So this is just sort of the background. So as this was all happening, I kind of saw a need, and I also saw a lot of amazing people doing amazing things. So I reached out kind of far and wide in different places, and I asked a lot of scientists and researchers and educators working in New Jersey and a few outside, if they wanted to help, and 42 said yes. So that was really incredible. I felt really lucky to have such great colleagues in my corner who were willing to contribute. Because again, I've been sort of following this and doing some research on this process, but I'm certainly not the expert, and I'm not the expert on everything. It's really important that we have many voices that contributed to this book, and I'm very proud of that. I had some rough ideas of the type of chapters we might see. Um, And some of the chapters we got followed those ideas and some didn't. And I feel really great about that. The other piece is we used a critical friend peer review process to balance the time demands that we had. We wanted to make sure this came out in a timely manner, but also we wanted to make sure that there was a second set of eyes on everyone's papers and some clarity about some accuracy and relevance as well. So again, these 42 folks not only said yes and wrote like crazy, they also reviewed their peers' work, which I'm really impressed with. So for tonight's chat, I sort of gave you the chapter one, which is the overview of where we're going. I'm not going to reiterate that. We're going to talk about a few different chapters here. So chapter three is about some initial research that I did alongside colleagues from TCNJ and Subject to Climate about teachers' initial reactions to climate change ed in New Jersey. Chapter seven, Mel is going to share with you about climate change education specifically in the STEM classroom. And then she's going to move on to another chapter that she worked on relating to data visualization to enhance climate change education. And then we're going to move on. Sammy is going to talk about socio-scientific issues as a framework for teaching climate change. And then Karen's going to share two of the chapters she contributed to, making some of those connections, bridging classrooms and communities, and thinking more directly about professional learning related to climate change here in New Jersey. I don't think Missy is able to make it tonight, but if she can jump on, I think she will potentially tag team it with Karen. So just very briefly, I can give you a very short overview about chapter three, and then I'm going to pass it on to my colleagues.
Yeah, Lauren, if I could, so one of the things just to let everybody know that I've asked folks to do who are present is just to give us a brief overview. Like you might seem don't let the amount of bullets on the slide scare you. These are used for other things, but it's just to introduce the ideas to the discussion and that so that we can have a more question and answer. So go ahead and take it away with chapter three.
All right, thanks. So we wanted to know, are teachers ready? Are they feeling like they can teach about climate change soon after that announcement was made? So we did a survey in June 2022 and then December 2022. So they officially rolled out in September 22. So just before and just after the standards rolled out, we got responses from 122 educators across 58 districts. Decent representation across middle and high school, not as many elementary teachers. Most of the teachers reported that there is currently insufficient curriculum integration and that they needed some time to either reevaluate their existing curriculum or to bring in some new materials. Um, Largely a lack of professional development about climate change, that was one of the biggest concerns that teachers had. Um, a lot of teachers expressed concerns about their confidence in an ability to locate good resources in a timely manner that they can bring into their classrooms. And then finally, this, like I said, this was co-authored with folks from Subject to Climate. If you're not familiar with them, they are a nonprofit online curriculum connector. They have free searchable instructional tools from short activities you might want to do with a class through full unit plans. And the big thing that they have is there's sort of a level of screening that goes into the resources that they share. So every resource that they share has been vetted by both a scientist and a teacher so that they know that there's at least content accuracy and a teacher has looked at it and said, this could work in the space of a real classroom. So they rolled out a New Jersey specific hub of their website, and we did ask if the teachers had access to the hub or if they had looked to it. And it seemed to have a small but hopefully growing effect in helping teachers feel a little bit more content. Um, at this very early piece, most teachers said they rarely integrated climate change into their instruction. And when we got to the end of 2023, we did another administration of the survey, but had a really small response rate. So we didn't report on that with the rest of the data. Things did bump up a little bit more frequently when we got into 2023. So that was just sort of the landscape of when this big change rolled out. What did everything look like, and kind of where was everybody at the beginning? So, and that was just to sort of lay the land at the beginning of the textbook, at the beginning of the book. So there was sort of the introductory information I talked to you about before. Ian Gray, who is a naturalist, he was in Mercer County and now he's moved somewhere up north. He wrote a beautiful poetic scientific chapter about the scientific effects of climate change in our state, and then this kind of gave the lay of the land for where teachers were. And then I decided to pass the torch on to some other folks. So I'm going to pass you on to chapter 7, which Mel is going to talk to you a little bit more about regarding climate change in a STEM classroom.
Thanks, Lauren. So I co-authored this chapter with Rachel Devano and Kelly Smith, and they are both practicing teachers right now. So this chapter really took a focus on problem solving with an interdisciplinary approach, and interdisciplinary is even beyond just the subjects of STEM. We really even looked beyond STEM. We talked a little bit about some standards that support climate change education. NGSS, of course, was there, and we talked about the incorporation of engineering concepts and NGSS as they relate to problem solving. And then, since it's focused on New Jersey, we also highlighted the New Jersey technology standards. So that's computer science and design thinking. And again, sort of tied it back to that problem solving approach. We also talked about how to motivate students and finding that real world problems and real world data was a motivating factor for students. We should help them feel as though they can make a difference. And this could also serve as sort of an introduction to activism for these students. And then finally, towards the end of the chapter, there was some specific middle school standards that we called out and provided some suggestions for applying those to specific, climate change applications. So that was chapter 7. I'm going to kind of go through both of these quickly. And then chapter 9, I was working with Kristen Hunter Thompson and Carrie Ferraro. Carrie Ferraro is at Rutgers University, so another New Jersey person here. And this chapter was focused on data visualization and relating it to climate change education. So again, we also took a very cross-curricular approach. And I called out a couple things in this chapter that I think folks would find valuable and find helpful. The first is there's a glossary at the back of the chapter. It calls out some data vocabulary that we use throughout the chapter that teachers might find helpful or valuable. There's also a guideline for appropriate visualization types by grade level. So when a visualization type should ideally be introduced to students and how they kind of build on that as they go through the grade levels. We talked a little bit about some resources, both online and offline, and some of these sources may be familiar to you all. So we talked a little bit about Tableau, NASA, Globe, and CODAP. Actually, the next slide, not yet, Lauren, but the next slide will show an example of a data set that we talked about from CODAP. So really at the end of the chapter, we gave some practical applications, ways that this has been applied, or little vignettes of ways that data visualization has been applied to climate change education, as well as a couple of suggestions for just how to integrate some more data practices into your classrooms. Lauren, I'm not sure who's controlling. There you go. Thank you. Here is one of the data sets that we had mentioned in the chapter. Again, this is from CODAP, and it is a data set about earthquakes. And so we tried to call out those that were related to environmental science, climate science, that students would be able to jump right in and start visualizing some data. So that's chapter 9. Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. Sammy.
Thanks so much, and thanks everybody for being here. My name is Sammy Khan, Princeton University, and I'm a science educator, and I'm presenting on behalf of myself and my wonderful colleague, Tim Lintner from University of South Carolina, Aiken. And Tim is a social studies educator, and we love to work together because to us, science and social studies are the peanut butter and jelly of education. They just go together so well. And when you think about science as understanding the natural world and social studies as understanding the social world or human world and interactions around history or geography and economics and civics and government and so on, the two go together so well. And thinking about climate change, we said to ourselves, it's not only the greatest probably the greatest existential threat of our time. But on the flip side, it's also probably one of the richest curricular contexts for teaching science and social studies. And so we really took that perspective with this chapter in thinking about how can we look at climate change as really an ideal situation for teaching these two areas. And in part, they work together so well because when you look at current conceptualizations of science or social studies literacy by looking at the national standards or our state standards, both of these areas emphasize inquiry, students as not passive learners, but real investigators, using evidence, analyzing evidence, applying it to the real world, and hopefully getting engaged civically. But often science and social studies are both siloed in the schools, and people often have misconceptions about them as being around memorization of facts and so on, rather than lively and empowering fields. And so we draw from a framework called Socioscientific Issues, or SSI, which really encourages students to investigate complex, often controversial societal issues related to science as a way of promoting scientific literacy, social studies literacy, engaged citizenship, and even moral development in terms of thinking about, students understanding the consequences of actions or inactions around climate change. Lauren, if you could advance, thanks. So in this chapter together, we present really the rationale for bringing science and social studies together. We introduce both the state and national standards related to science and social studies education related to climate change. We give some background on the theory and practice around this SSI framework, which ultimately engages students in discourse, debate, bringing together different perspectives and understanding evidence-based argument. And then we give a very practical section that is a model lesson plan vignette between a social studies middle school teacher and a science middle school teacher collaborating on a 5E lesson plan on climate change, civic participation, and so on, and evaluating evidence. We give adaptations for elementary and high school classrooms, so any teacher or policymaker or administrator who reads this would find it applicable to their levels. And then we give best practices summary, really on things very critical to any classroom, gathering and evaluating evidence, encouraging perspective taking, and assessing student work. And that is our chapter.
Okay. Thanks, Sammy. We'll pass it off to Karen.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm going to start by talking about Chapter 17, which is called Bridging Classrooms and Communities for Climate Change. And this chapter was written in collaboration with Tina Overman, Kelly Stone, Chris Turnbull, and myself. And the three of them are classroom teachers, and I really have the privilege tonight to present a lot of the work that they contributed to this chapter from the perspective of classroom teachers doing the work with students. And so you can see on the left-hand side there some of the key strategies for each of the community partnerships that they built from within their school districts. Again, they're in 2 different school districts, and we're able to integrate a number of student-facing projects that really bridged the classrooms, as our title says, to communities and folks in the communities who were able to enhance the work that they were doing in the classroom. So some of those strategies were collaborating with local organizations and nonprofits to provide hands-on experiences. And some examples, if you kind of tag to the right there, pollinator projects, ideas about community nutrition and equity, farmers markets, composting on campus, watershed connections. All of these examples position students as researchers and activists, really gave them an opportunity to think critically about the real world application of what they were learning in the classroom. They utilized schools and community spaces to explore these climate change solutions and empowered students to engage in this culture of curiosity and agency. Every opportunity that they engaged in their different locations was really grounded in this idea of getting students engaged in some sort of local solution, no matter how small, to inspire action at a young age. And you can see the quote at the top there that sort of was our guideline. We will not protect what we do not love and cannot love what we do not know. So that's chapter 17. And then chapter 20, I worked with Andrea Drews and Missy Hulser, and we came up with a framework. So we know that educators really need professional learning in order to feel confident with this content and pedagogy. It's crucial for equipping educators with the knowledge and skills that are necessary to teach about this really important global issue. And so we had each worked in different contexts in professional development and climate change. And we started to look across those contexts for common themes, right? Common structures that we had in each of those spaces that could lend toward a framework, if you will. And so some of these here, two of them, the first two actually, I was directly involved in as the facilitator at Montclair State University's PRISM Center and the Endeavor STEM Teaching Certificate Project. And then Andrea as part of the Made Clear project, which stands for Maryland and Delaware Climate Change Education Assessment and Research. And Missy was part of the Climate on My Campus project, which was a collaboration with the New Jersey School of Conservation, where they were collecting data and bringing in some art and science and working with some local organizations. So if we look across those four examples, there are common components that make them successful. And you can see our little house framework here. The professional learning foundations is that we have school and administrative commitment when we're working with teachers. We know that's really important across the literature. We have alignment to standards-based content and practice, and we collaboratively develop clear goals. So we have to make sure that everybody, not just the facilitators in higher ed or other spaces, but the educators in the classroom are part of defining the clear goals. And then from there, we look at the design components. We make sure they're student-centered, they're place-based and locally focused, logistically feasible, and it turns out that at the top of this model, we come up with the idea that it really has to be, or it turns into an effective professional learning opportunity if all of those other structures are in place. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, everybody. Okay, I think I want to open it up to questions, but I'm going to take my prerogative and get the first one. I think that I mean, my reaction to this book was just, I was astounded, like, at how rich it was in resources. And there were things I read in here that I honestly haven't read anywhere else. I mean, the chapter about school librarians and climate change really kind of blew my mind. I thought it was just something I had never made that connection before, but it seemed so obvious in hindsight. So there was this, like, and even the story, the elementary principal, and Lauren, you had told me about her previously, but like the way an administrator at a small elementary school can support climate change education, like it was really well thought out, and I think there were everything that was mentioned just now, like it really comes through as, like, my metaphor is a gift basket. Like if you have a gift basket full of like so many, oh, look, they got Pocky in here or whatever it is, you know, like there's cool stuff in here as I kept going. So with that wide variety of things, and Lauren, I'll throw this to you, but anybody else can answer and chime in as well. Like, what do you or any of you see as the main priorities right now in terms of the work ahead for the science teaching and learning community here? Like, which things have the highest priority? Or is that even a question we should be asking, knowing that it's going to take a million different little things, right? Like to begin addressing climate change. So I'm wondering how this group thinks about, like, okay, we've got all this. What are our priorities?
So I have an answer that's kind of a non-answer, if that's okay. I think so. Part of why I love this book and I'm proud of this book is that it gives a million entry points. And I think we really, if we want to really advocate for comprehensive climate change education, we need to let everyone enter where they're comfortable. So for some teachers, that might be partnering with the school librarian because I'm very nervous about my content knowledge or my ability to find good resources. And if I pair with her, I'm going to have a little bit more confidence and my students are going to be more likely to have their questions supported, and I might build a little bit of confidence through that paired teacher. For some others, especially when we think about secondary science and other STEM spaces, they might have been doing this forever. And what they need is to really engage with their community and have more authentic place-based experiences and really build and grow something that already existed. So I think, so I guess for me, I think we need to have multiple entry points and multiple places because I think and I guess I'll kind of come back and say, to me, in my experience, anytime I've heard a practicing teacher, myself included, discuss a change they've made in their practice, it's because it worked for the kids. It's because they decided they took a risk and they showed this video or they did this short activity or they did the paired lesson with the librarian and the kids lit up and asked 1,000 questions. And that motivated them to change their practice a little bit further. So I think whatever you can do to introduce this content in a way that lights the kids up, which then goes back and lights you up, is probably the best way forward. And I know that's a non-answer, and I know I should be saying comprehensive, place-based, interdisciplinary, justice-focused instruction. But you know what? If it's a great worksheet that's developmentally appropriate, that's better than nothing. And I think we have to remember that it's really important that there's lots of starting points and that there's lots of places that make kids light up. I'm curious what my co-authors have to say.
Feel free, just unmute. You feel free to jump in.
I'd be happy to just dovetail on what Lauren said, which is that there's already so much on teachers. And I think if we look at this as a way of just enhancing what they're already doing or coming or looking at some of these chapters as things that in many ways are being done but weren't necessarily packaged or geared or thought of as standards with climate, it just makes it a lower barrier. For example, the chapter that I worked on with Tim on the socioscientific issues, it's just efficient. It's very efficient teaching to think about a socioscientific issue. You are just in the little lesson we present hitting social studies standards, science standards. You could easily hit ELA standards, math standards in there. And so it's not it's not just additive, because so much of what teachers hear all the time is now you've got to be doing X, Y, and Z and social emotional learning and everything else that's put on top of that. I think climate really is just this comprehensive area that's rich for teaching so much so efficiently and effectively, and it's so meaningful already to people that that's half of the battle. And just as Lauren said, if it lights up the students, it does light up the teacher. But I think it's hard for teachers to be enthusiastic when there's just so much put on them. But I think that when you look at these chapters, the thing that struck me was just how straightforward, or I would say how the low barrier it was to be able to embrace these chapters, implement them, and be very efficient in your time.
Thanks to you both. I would like to open it up to those of you attending tonight, and I'm gonna jockey the screen a little bit so people who are talking are pinned to the screen, so it gets on the recording as well. So if you have a question, either you can raise your digital hand, or if you can just put your question in the chat. So I'll do our Mary Budrow wait time here of 10 seconds or so and let folks take a moment and ask. Mark.
Thanks, Doug. And thanks, Lauren and crew, for what a wonderful presentation and what a wonderful project. Just, it's really inspiring. And got it right here. So cheers to, I want to just call out Sammy and her collaboration, her pushing the collaboration with social studies teachers, because I told Doug in a conversation just a few days ago that if you go to the website of the National Council of Social Studies and you take a look at the 9 or 10 main principles that they advocate teaching in some form, K through 12, they just echo climate change topics, all of them. And so I'm just all in favor of talking teachers into understanding that it's not just a science topic and it's not just the greenhouse effect. It's almost everything that human beings do, almost everything about the natural world. So that's my preamble to my question. It's not connected though. So Lauren and colleagues, I'm interested in the teachers that are not in the book, who were maybe thinking about doing some climate change teaching. They they're close to getting themselves in the game, but they're not there. That might be a huge group compared to the teachers you've got in the book. And for us to have leverage as educators, we have to have a ton of people on board, right? And what's your theory about the ways in? You use that term, I think, Lauren, different ways in for people who are still not there.
May I respond? Thanks. Thanks for
Oh,
the
sorry.
great question, Mark. So when I think about the professional learning chapter, and I think about the best practices that we've seen across those 4 examples, there's a component of teacher leadership embedded in each of those. Specifically, the one I'm closest to, the Endeavor STEM example. At the end of that experience, there's a requirement to identify some aspect of your local community, your colleagues in your school district, that you can connect with and bring, in the case of the climate change courses, bring climate change through that lens that they autonomously identify as members of that community that will work in that context. And I've seen that happen in other spaces as well, but giving the opportunity for the teacher to be the leader, and I know most people in this room are very familiar with that literature, to identify the entry points for the school district or their audience and become that leader, even if it's to a small group of individuals, to continue to engage others in the work.
Thanks. I'll just add that one thing that this book does that I think is, we're as a community of researchers in the area of science teaching and learning, I've often felt that we have an obligation, as Lauren did, that when we encounter teachers in our practice who maybe would like, they have great ideas but they might not have the capacity to bring it to a larger audience, that is something that we can do. Um, we don't want to do it in a way that backfires and gets them in trouble, especially if they're trying to do things quietly. We have to do it with them, not for them. But I think that's a real strength of this book, the fact that there is that integration of the researchers and the teachers, and many of the researchers were teachers. But that's another thing that connects with Mark's question as well. Lauren, you got it.
So I think this is something I really, really grapple with, Mark. And thank you so much for your kind words. I respect your work so much, and I'm really grateful for everything you said. And I agree, Sammy's chapter is amazing, about science and social studies together. Um, I think I see sort of 2 roadblocks that I'm trying to find ways around, and I'd love answers to it. One of them is when people in this room talk about professional development, we talk about these engaging, ongoing activities where people think carefully over long periods of time over an important topic and reflect on their teaching. And when schools think about professional development, they think about an 8-hour in-service day. And half the time, everyone goes to the same 8-hour in-service day. And the end of the story is everyone learns to say fantastic more often or something like that, right? And so I think kind of bridging that gap between the way we think about professional learning and the way schools think about professional learning to help engage those teachers who are trying to dip their toe in this line is really important. And again, I think Karen's solution there with more teacher leadership if we get more teacher leaders to play a role in some more of that turnkey PD on those in-service days, maybe that's a good way in. The other piece, and this is, I said it was beyond the scope of what we're talking about tonight, but I have the mic for a minute, so I'm going to just say it. We did a study last year where we went to 50 classrooms across the state to see teachers who volunteered to teach about climate change. So my team and I did 50 classroom observations across 20 of the 21 counties in New Jersey, and they're about a third middle, a third high school, a third elementary school, across all different subjects. These teachers range from very good to best in the world. There were county teachers of the year. There's a Milken educator, superstars. In only 6 cases did an administrator greet the researcher. So in 12% of the time, and we knew these were rock stars. If someone called the school and said, "Can I see an example of somebody doing X that's great?" These are who they're turning to. And in only 6 of 50 cases could they even stop by and shake my hand and say, "Wow, Susan's doing great, isn't she?" So I think that support. So I think if I'm a teacher who's nervous about taking this on, and I know even this best in the world teacher who's next door to me isn't getting a handshake, I don't necessarily have the confidence to go that next step further. So I feel like that audience of super, and I know principals have a lot on their plates. I understand that, but there's got to be some middle ground that we can work through too.
That's consistent with a couple of teachers I'm working with in Los Angeles. They created a full year integrated interdisciplinary science course around climate change solutions and justice. And they said over and over the support of their principal was absolutely essential.
May I just add one quick, I promise, very quick comment
Please.
on that? And in terms of the principal support, I mean, sort of the elephant in the room here is the idea of controversy, right? And teaching things that may be viewed as controversial. One of the things that I do love about that SSI or socioscientific issues framework for teacher development is that it helps teachers become comfortable with discomfort, to become comfortable with complex issues. Very often science teachers will say, well, I don't know anything about societal issues. I'm not a sociologist, I'm not a social studies educator, et cetera, or I don't deal with controversies. And so that's an area that I think really is very important, and it is critical that principals have teachers' backs in that. So for me, a big part of the professional development would be that type of work around something like socioscientific issues to help teachers feel confident and comfortable and safe in working in this area and knowing that they have the principal's support and really focusing on evidence-based argument and so on rather than, the political piece.
Thanks for your contribution and question there, Mark. We appreciate it. Jess. Oh,
Hi, okay. I
oh,
got it. I got it. That's funny. So first I wanted to say hi to so many friends on the call. And also I wanted to just thank everybody for bringing joy into my day. I had a lot going on, but this is very joyful in a really hard time. So I kind of want to build a little bit on what Mark said, because I've been straddling kind of working with this in New York and in New Jersey. And in New Jersey, it's kind of great because we have the standards to kind of scaffold us, and we do have the request for the PD, like Lauren was saying. But I want to kind of connect to something that Sammy just said. And in my experiences in New Jersey, the issue for me has not been the teacher's lack of entry or reticence in entry. They're more concerned about the families where the children go home to and how families will receive this curriculum. And I just want to give the flip side. In New York, the efforts that relate to sustainability are being run by like the part of the city that runs like the physical plant of the schools, not the instructional arm, which is actually quite interesting because it like relates to kind of like, recycling basically in the schools is who the sustainability coordinators are. They're physical plant persons, not instructional. So the work, there's like a really weird conflict and tension between how it's kind of rolling out in New York versus how it's rolling out in New Jersey. But I wanted to ask, what has your experience been kind of about situating this discussion to make the community feel comfortable? Because that was my experience in PD, that teachers wanted to do this, but they were afraid the reactions from homes were going to be the barrier, not the school setting.
I talked a lot, so if any of my co-authors want to jump on, please do.
Go ahead, Lauren. That's what you get for being an editor.
Thanks, Jess. It's good to see you. So yeah, so it's interesting. Some of the sustainability efforts in New Jersey, we've got an organization called Sustainable Jersey, which is mostly about facilities, and it's less about the teaching and learning. So that's been kind of interesting that this is sort of coming parallel. Um, I think, the standards help with the argument to just say this is, you have to teach this. It's the rules, right? And that's kind of what it is. But I think when we focus more on that really the global competitiveness, and I mean, I hate making this super capitalistic argument here, but like if you look at what's on the PISA, right? Like, and you look at the things that are going to be tested to help make sure that our students are globally competitive, then one, they need to know the things that they'll be able to do those jobs one day, and they'll need to know to how to fix them and to change them. And maybe we suck it up and we say green energy and innovation and we use all the words that are not climate change, which I hate doing that. But I think much like everybody needs an entry point, I think this is sort of everybody needs a talking point, and maybe we start with that and we talk about, this is learning for the future. This is learning for the future economy. 21st century skills, exactly. All those like buzzwords are there because I think, we look at the wind turbines are coming, whether people hate them or not, right? We're going to have them. There's a reason why Texas is the leader in onshore wind. Eventually, there's not going to be oil. We need people who know how to fix them. And if we don't start talking about the problems that are solved with them, then we're not going to have people who know how to fix them. And we need people who can invent the best version of them that no one can imagine right now. And we can't do that unless we're preparing students for that. So I think as much as I don't want to make this an argument just about money in the future, you can make it an argument about money in the future.
I'll just echo you. Like, I feel a little bit seen because the way I've always responded, I'm like, this is kind of the law of like what has to, like we're supposed to be talking about as teachers. So it's also, I also have to say, I don't know, I mean, you got to work with some superstars, but sometimes I just actually point people to the New Jersey website. And it's so shocking to me how like a lot of the teachers I work with, for no fault of their own, they don't even know what resides as like the curriculum on that site. And in many times because like there's so many degrees away from it, like in how their administrators support them. So I appreciate this work so much. It's very invigorating. And to Mark's point, like I feel like we could teach every subject through this context.
Thanks, Jess. And thanks for your questions. Really good to see you. Catherine, you want to ask your question?
Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine Lanowet. I'm a professor at William and Mary, and we actually have a couple students on the call. So we're coming from a Virginia perspective. It's part of a course called Educating for Climate Justice. So we've been really interested in all the different models, and it's so awesome to see the coalescing of New Jersey and how it came to be, and then the book as a resource of examples. I was curious, though, as authors, one of the things we've been talking about is the dynamics of power, right, at so many different scales with climate. As we think about young people, teachers, oil executives, right, politicians. And I was curious, I've started digging into the New Jersey standards a bit, but how you all think about educating with power in mind, and thinking especially like a concrete tension I see in climate education is gearing toward individual action when there's a great need for collective action. So I was just curious how those tensions came up in the standard development, and then also maybe some of your examples with data visualizations or the other examples you all had, how you kind of wrestled with that.
Who'd like to field that pop fly here? Lauren, why don't you take it?
I see Mel looking up, so I think
Oh,
she's
okay.
thinking on the data visualization. I can yeah, so I think you're right. So the collective is what's actually going to make change one day, right? And I one of the things I kind of keep going back to is so here in New Jersey we are experiencing a lot more crops that are blooming more than typical. If they usually have two harvests in a season, they've got three sometimes now. There's a lot more strawberries more frequently, right? And I've got fig trees in my backyard that are blooming three times, which is insane. And when I lived in North Carolina, they bloomed twice. So there's there's some big changes, and that's affecting kids' bodies. There's more asthma, there's more allergies, there's more upset from sinus headaches. And if my 12-year-old comes home from school miserable and wants to take a 20-minute shower, I'm not going to make him feel guilty for his individual action of steaming his head when he was affected that way. And I think it's really important, especially for young kids, that we're really clear that that it's the collective actions that matter a little bit more. And I think it's also really important, especially when we're looking at the K-5 space, um, that the justice piece and the problem solving piece is super relevant to kids. So one of the main ways I've thought about that recently, and when I've done some work with elementary teachers, is we've talked a lot about this flooding. So we've had school floods, we've had schools closed for weeks for floods. It affects everybody, same storm, different boats. So in Patterson, the schools are closed. In my kids' schools, their chorus concert is canceled because they can't let grandparents walk on the soggy ground at night. So everybody's affected by it in one way, but a little bit differently. And great solution is planting more native plants and having better drainage in schoolyards so that kids can play outside a little bit more. And I think when you do more of the connection to things that affect all of the kids in your school and then all of the kids in your state, that really matters. So kids can advocate for creating solutions that affect them and their bodies and their days at school in a way that also affect other kids in a positive way that way. So I think oftentimes, kids can't vote, kids don't have money, kids can't do a lot of things that we think of when we think of collective action, but advocating for things that would help kids, especially things that hurt some kids more than others, is one way to help kids think collectively about solutions. And that's been one path that's worked for me, though I'd be really curious to hear what other folks. Also, I think it's really important for that mental health piece for kids to not feel super guilted about personal individual actions that happen in isolated times, like that long hot shower when you have too much pollen in your head.
Lauren, I would add to that too, just to support what you were saying is part of students coming up with solutions might be exploring real world data and giving them those tools to look at what is really happening in the state, in the country, in the world around them. And that can start at a younger age. I mean, they can look at more simple data sets and draw conclusions and things like that. So yeah, I mean, it can definitely happen in the upper grades, but certainly in lower as well.
I'll jump in to share on the chapter that I worked on. The lesson plan that we walk everyone through is a having students engage in a mock United Nations summit, and that's collective decision making and collective prioritizing, and that's actually a big thing in this SSI framework, which is really having students think about the fact that okay, there's no wrong answer here, but you have to understand people's perspectives, look at data, and listen and be willing to rethink your perspectives potentially, and be open to alternatives. And I think even though it's a mock situation, it's really helping students to become comfortable with rethinking their positions and really how to weigh and analyze and understand the credibility or lack thereof of the evidence which they're presented. So I think that's pretty powerful. And just super quickly, I just want to quickly go back to Jess's question. In the SSI framework, also one of the things that we often recommend, and I as a teacher and even as an author always have, is communicating with families before you even start what you're doing. And we even give sample letters to families saying, here's what we're doing, why we're doing it, here's what students are coming away with and how they can use that, and then inviting families in. So with that framework that we use, it could be coming in to watch a debate or participate in a debate or a discussion, or a fair where students are sharing their perspectives on what piece of this United Nations summit, for example, they might have selected. And by doing that, it's empowering the families as well, because ultimately that's really what we want is an empowered, engaged, civically minded right community. And so it's again one of those reasons why I love the science and the social studies connection, because that really is very part and parcel of what they do in social studies education. And I think we science educators have a lot to learn from that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your question, Catherine. We've got one more, and Suzanne, I'm just going to ask people, there are some comments and questions in the chat there. Suzanne, I don't know if you wanted to ask your question, and I see one more in the chat, or one more hand up.
Yeah, I can ask it because I looked back at it and I definitely like began writing a couple times and then deleted and then started again. And so there's some disconnect, I think, in how I wrote it. But I'm gonna keep my camera off because they look a little crazy at the moment. But let me find it. So, and I also admitted that I have not read the book yet, but I'm very excited to. And my question is really about the challenge of teachers being able to teach these complex ideas that climate change involve. So right now I'm teaching, just to give like a preface, I'm teaching future 1 through 6 candidates that are going to be special needs teachers, their science and math methods class in 1 semester. And I do try to make it as interdisciplinary as possible, that they're trying to incorporate all different things, including history and ELA. And so climate change obviously comes up, like we've all mentioned already, as a great way for them to do this because there's so many components in there. But at the same time, what I'm noticing is that they hold a lot of misconceptions about different ideas related to climate change, or they just simply don't know the content knowledge yet. And so for me to be able to tackle that within 1 semester, and I will mention, I teach 3 sections of this course right now, and 2 of them are asynchronous, which is a challenge all in itself. And then 1 is on Zoom. So I'm just interested in all of your thoughts, the authors here. And yeah, many of them do not have science backgrounds. So yeah, thoughts about how to, maybe not specifically for my course, even though I'd love that. Your thoughts on that idea.
So I would say climate change education in kindergarten or 1st grade can mean knowing the difference between weather and climate, right? Like that's an important, if everybody knew that, no one would throw snowballs on the US Senate floor and say there's no climate change, right? And I think also being super mindful that in many languages, weather and climate are the same word, and we have to be really careful on how we unpack these things and explain the difference in the concepts. But climate change and I think maybe that's our job as teacher educators to make it clear that laying a solid foundation is climate change education, right? So if all of our in New Jersey, you know, we look at maps in 3rd grade and social studies standards. If all of our 3rd graders had a chance to look at maps of how New Jersey has changed and compare those maps to photos over time, and they know the difference between weather and climate, and they know just a little bit about how the greenhouse effect works, or a little bit about collective action and youth advocacy for things, by the time they get to 7th or 8th grade, when it's developmentally appropriate to talk about some of these more difficult mathematical ideas or political ideas, well, they're ready to have those conversations. And I think that's kind of part of the difference here. You know, some I have to say, I have been blown away at what PE teachers are capable of and what they're willing to do with regard to climate education. I've been shocked by it. But really having tough conversations with little guys about why we can't go outside when it's smoky and what that smoke does to our bodies and how it hurts even more if we're running around too much. I think really letting kids connect to how the changing climate and climate events affect their lives and their bodies, and having a really rudimentary fundamental knowledge of some of these processes, that's climate education too. So I think we need to be clear that no one is expecting first graders to look at the Keeling curve. And I think if we told first grade teachers you're going to do climate change, they're thinking, oh no, I have to teach the Keeling curve to first graders. I don't even know what that is, right? So I think it's really important that we're really clear at being translators for what climate ed works means for little guys. I think there's one more question, but there's something I forgot to say earlier with the folks from William and Mary. I also want to just give a shout out to the youth of Virginia. I have gotten more emails from random high school students in Virginia who have been going to school boards, trying to make arguments to change what's happening in their schools. It's more from Virginia than anywhere else. I have no idea why, but you guys are great. And I'm really glad you're on the call.
Thanks, everybody. We'll give the last question. We'll let the two Laurens talk to each other. Lauren Lane, I'm going to pin you here to the front. Okay, you have the floor.
Okay, awesome. So I'm one of those students from William and Mary, so thank you for the shout out. My question kind of jumps off of what you just said and what was just asked, but my mom's an elementary school teacher, and something that we talk about all the time is the response to kids during COVID in elementary school and how they've lost a lot of that engagement. I'm from Virginia Beach, so a lot of my engagement came from field trips to the beach, and I just spent a lot of time outside, and there was a lot of time that was lost for those type of kids, and that's where a lot of that passion grows for climate change. So I guess my question for you is, what is the response to kids who lose that hands-on education and are now just playing the catch-up game and just simply don't care? They're just trying to get by with other classes. So what is the response to making up that time?
That's a big question. So I should say, so we don't know what kids lost entirely, right? I'm going to give an example for my own son, and I hope he doesn't hear me as I'm sharing this because he'll be embarrassed. My 12-year-old is very bright and has always done well in science and math, and he's in 6th grade now. And he just sort of said out loud one day, if we put broccoli outside, would it just sprout roots and grow? And I realized he never learned the life cycle of a plant. He was never in school at a time where they went from seed to flower and looked at that, because that was just missed. And despite the fact that I keep a garden and he's seen lots of seeds planted in his life and he's experienced lots of plants, that was something that never happened at school. So he had truly no idea and it wasn't broccoli, it was a pumpkin. He thought the pumpkin might just sprout into a new pumpkin plant and that the stem might go off. And he used a lot of good reasoning, right? Like he really thought his way through it, but it was also clear there was never a time that he drew that diagram that we all drew in school when we were in 2nd grade. Um, and there's going to be things like that that keep coming up. You know, I remember 1st grade teachers saying like, oh my goodness, these kids just keep going to the bathroom and eating snacks, because that's all they knew, right? And they didn't even learn what it is to be in school where you have to ask to go to the bathroom and you have snack at snack time. So I think some of what kids missed, we're going to just pick up those pieces when they show up, and we're not going to know what they are, and we're going to be really surprised by them. But for the science, especially that requires guided hands-on activities when they're little, I think it's going to be a little bit of a mystery. But also go outside all the time. If you can't go outside, look out the window. Go outside as much as you can, touch as many things as you can, figure out what things are there, get curious about stuff, figure out what you love and what you hate about what's in your schoolyard. If you hate ticks, get really excited when it's a super cold day that's going to kill those ticks, right? And I think that would be my argument, is to just go outside as much as possible, and if it's unsafe to go outside, then look out the window as much as possible. But that's just me.
I feel compelled to add that it's very easy to slip into thinking about what students don't know and what experiences they don't have. But that list is long for all of us, right? I mean, and so flipping that around to that sort of asset-based framework, okay, these kids are coming in with this experience, they're coming in with, you know, in the prior year's classes, they were taught this. So that's your raw material. And I will say, as a 55-year-old who's learning how to play the banjo for the first time, it's never too late, right? Like you can still like there is no late to the party, especially in 2024, 25, when you can find everything out that there's so many ways to learn now. From and going outside is really important. That we have a different sort of outside environmental space for students to be in than perhaps, certainly from when I was younger, but even I saw a difference in my own children. But I think it's really important to go into that space thinking about what experiences students have had and what resources they're coming in with, because they're coming with everything they got, right? Their parents are sending you the best kid they got. And so it's our responsibility to now meet them where they are and go from there. Thanks for your question, Lauren. And speaking of going from there, I want to thank all of our presenters today. This was wonderful. I'm going to stop the recording now.